Hello, welcome back to another reaction video. We've got something quite special today. We've got something I've wanted to do for an incredibly long time, but haven't had an opportunity to do it. And I've just been sitting here watching some videos, and I've decided, hey, I'll turn the camera on and I will make a recording. So today we're going to be watching. I have been recording videos today. We're going to be watching some of my favourite aviation videos, and I've picked out, I need to count the tabs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I've picked out 11 of my favourite and ones which have a bit of an explanation behind them, and there's a reason as to why I've picked them out. Half of them is Concorde, which is not surprising. But I'm going to do another video solely on Concorde because as I record this, it's October 2023, and 20 years ago this month Concorde made its final passenger flight, and then 20 years ago next month it made its final flight ever. So we're going to do a bit of a Concorde special at some point, but I'm not going to spoil it too much by watching too many Concorde things, but Concorde is an aircraft I could speak about for hours and hours. Anyway, we're going to start with an aircraft I chose not so much because of its looks, which is what I chose Concorde for, but more because of the sound. And it is the P-51 Mustang with its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, which is a beautiful engine in itself, but the Mustang has something which sticks it out from the rest of aircraft of that period, in that it makes a high-pitched whine. So we're going to have a bit of a listen to that. So we will get on, and obviously I don't own any of these videos, so, you know, do have a look at the original creators. I feel I have to say that. Right, let's get into it. They're used a lot in air racing. Not so much now, but they were. It's in a moment. Here we go. So this next one, this is one of the reasons why I like the Mustang so much, and you get this whine. It's an amazing sound. It just screams at you. It's a nice aircraft. It's very nice. So, that's the first one, the P-51 Mustang. Now we're going to go on to another incredibly beautiful aircraft. It's also a Delta Wing, but it's not a passenger aircraft. It is, of course, the Vulcan. And the Vulcan also makes, it's not so much a scream, it's more of a howl, and that was one of its greatest characteristics. And at air shows and public displays, they'd kind of pronounce, is the word pronounce? Yeah, they'd beef up the howl a bit to make it really, really howl. And one of the best recordings I can find of this is at Dawlish Air Show. And you can see that they fly it along the bay, and then they curl it round the seafront, and as they do that they open up the throttle, and that's when you get the howl. And so they'll start it banking in a minute. And then they'll open up the throttle. Here we go. You get this amazing sound. And the Vulcan was taken out of service in 2015, and I remember watching it at an airshow in 2014. I also saw it at an airshow in 2015, but at Shoreham airshow in 2015. And it's that sound, and I remember when I heard it, I was very young, but I was in a tent or something, like selling model aircraft, I think it was, and the ground started vibrating, and then you just heard this absolutely deafening roar, followed by this sound, and it made me get goosebumps, and I do still occasionally get goosebumps, but I get them more with Concorde, but you'll see in a minute, it's just a beautiful sound. I think I might have to listen to that again. It makes me go a bit weird. That's amazing, that is. Oh, hello. Go away. The Vulcan was one of its more famous roles or exercises it carried out was Operation Black Buck in the Falklands War, and because this was I think it was a nuclear bomber that could drop large bombs. It was just such a beautiful aircraft, and I was so lucky to have seen it flying. I was very sad when they took it out of service. Anyway, we're going to stick with the Vulcan now, and we're going to head to Wellesbourne Mountford, where they have a Vulcan. Hold on. Okay, so XH558, that's the one which was flying the longest and was the last one to fly, but XM655 is the one they have at Wellesbourne Mountford, and they do high-speed taxi runs, not so much high speed, taxi runs down the runway every now and then. And they have a set protocol and procedure, and they take it down, get it to a certain speed, pull the throttles back, put the nose down, put your stick forward, and brake. And in some cases, when they have a bit of a longer runway, they can actually raise the nose up and use the delta wing as a speed brake. But they don't do that here. And anyway, this time, last year this was, they took it down the runway, and then it wouldn't stop. It just carried on. And it went off the end of the runway and dug itself into the ground. And its nose was overhanging the road. And this is one of the recordings of it. So it comes along. You can hear the throttles are idle, and they're braking, but the aircraft isn't stopping. And the end of the runway is about there. So we kind of just get... And it stopped. I think it was about 30 foot from, maybe even less than that, 20 foot from the hedge, and its nose was hanging over the road. And you can see it really does. They had to cut the ground away from underneath it and pull it out with tractors. It's quite impressive how they got it out, and it's back doing the taxi runs now. But they've got a little bit sheepish, I think, and don't get it so close to the road. I wonder if there are any videos of it going off that? No. Well, but yeah, no, it is good fun. And the Vulcan's a lovely aircraft. It was one of the Beautiful aircraft. Delta winged aircraft have always got a soft spot with me. I don't know why, but they are just very beautiful. Right, swiftly moving on, we're going to move to the Victor. Now, Bruntingthorpe. I believe the last flight of the Victor was 1990? I believe it was. Does it say? Oh, I've got 2 videos of this, you see. So Handley Page, right, well, So it was manufactured by Hadley Page, and it is the Victor. And it's never been that much of a fan of its looks, but it's quite a historic aircraft. Anyway, and this is another aircraft which they've kept in a serviceable condition where they can do taxi runs. And these ones, this is a Bruntingthorpe, and that runway is slightly longer, I presume. So they actually do get it to a good speed, lift the nose up, jam the throttles back, and you know. And anyway, it went out of service in 1990, and in 2009 it fancied flying again, and it went for a little bit of a bunny hop down the runway. The second video I'll show you, the pilot, or the pilot in command, explained what happened, what led to the accidental takeoff. But in short, they were running it down the runway, and the engineer was sitting next to him, and he gave the order for the engineer to shut off the throttle, and he just froze with his hand on the throttle with them open. So a couple of seconds later, he realised he's not going to do it, so he had to take his hand off of the control column and shut the throttles himself. And at which point, the control column was holding the aircraft on the ground. He had to let go of it to shut the throttles off, and in that time, reared up and went flying. But this is obviously no one was expecting it, and quite a few people were worried because when it went up, the wind caught one of its wings, and it went, and it didn't stay in line with the runway. It jumped off to the side, and then they jammed the throttles back and smashed it into the ground. But they got it down, and it's fine. Almost. But here we go. And you can see how much power it's got. If you look at the trees behind, it's amazing. So it comes along, they get to almost rotation speed, lock off the throttle, raise the nose, except they didn't lock off the throttle. And then they lock off the throttle and try and get it onto the ground, and it just... They get it back down and they get it back on the runway, but it was hair-raising because they couldn't, because it was not, I suppose it didn't have a certificate of airworthiness, it wasn't allowed to be flown, it was only allowed to be taxied. So as soon as it got into the air, there was, this shouldn't be flying. Because if it was, a serviceable aircraft, the safest thing would have been to carry on and do a circuit and land it, but they couldn't, so they had to get it on the ground. And of course, it ran the risk of rearing up and stalling. But as the next video will say, the aircraft was responding to his inputs, so he was able to force it onto the ground again. But the reason I chose this, and I chose the Victor specifically, is because in this next video, the pilot in command was Bob Prothero, and he died last month. So I thought it would be quite nice to play his explanation of what happened at Bruntingthorpe.
It was going to be just an ordinary fast taxi run for the benefit of the spectators here at Bruntingthorpe. We'd briefed only to go up to 100 knots, and then we would close the throttles and slow down and stop. We accelerated away, and at about 80 or 90 knots, I called for the co-pilot to close the throttles, but he actually froze. We just kept going, and so I called for the throttles to be closed again, But again, absolutely nothing happened. And I glanced across and I saw that he had got his hands on the throttles, but he wasn't pulling them back. So at that stage, I realized I was going to have to do it. That meant taking my left hand that was holding the aircraft on the ground off the control column, move it over the throttles and close them myself. But when I took my hands off the controls, it reared up. And in just a split second, we were airborne and moving away with the crosswind, moving the aircraft very rapidly off.
That
Split second, we were airborne.
is when the wind catches that wing.
Away with the crosswind moving.
That's quite an alarming angle to see an aircraft at, which shouldn't be in the air.
The aircraft very rapidly off the center.
And then, of course, it was going off the runway, and they were running out of runway to land it. But he had quite a bit left.
Line and away over the grass. At which point, I must admit, I thought we were in for very serious trouble, because the most likely course of action was for the aircraft to stall, and we would just crash wherever we were.
I mean, there's a good thing online, which says the final flight of the Victor was in 1990, except it was actually in 2009, because that's flying. And you can see that the aircraft wanted to carry on flying. And, you know, when you get aircraft like that, you can kind of get there. It's almost as if they have a heart and they want to go flying again. But
I realised that the aircraft was actually flying and was responding to my flying control inputs. And having realised that and pushed the nose down, I realised I've still got more than half the runway left available to me. And with the nose down, I managed to point it back over the grass but towards the runway, and make a controlled landing. And I managed to get it back onto the tarmac of the runway. And once I was there, braking was, I would say, near maximum. And we stopped with several hundred feet to go to the end of the runway.
So, there we go. That's the Victor, and it's extra flight. Moving on, we've got the Vampire at Halfpenny Green. Vampire's a small, is it a turbine? Turbine jet? I don't know. Anyway, its throttle, its engine output is quite small, and there's a lot of power which comes out of that, and because it's coming out such a small hole, it's very concentrated, so there's a lot of force coming out of there. So it gets to the end of the runway, turns around, and then spools up the engines. Except the runway didn't like it that much. And it destroys the entire runway. It needs to be quite heavily repaired. But it took off, and obviously he didn't know what was happening behind it. But it's just going on ripping up the runway. It did land on another runway. Looks like runway 10 will be out. Yeah, so I mean, that's quite alarming, isn't it? You got that coming down, and it's a tarmac in the air. Yeah, good fun. But now, I could spend hours talking about this, so I'm going to try and control myself. We're going to Concorde, the most famous and probably the most perfect aircraft in the world. It's an aircraft I get very emotional about, because when I was very young, it was the aircraft which kind of seeded my passion in aviation. And I later went on to find out that its last flight was 2 days before I was born, which doesn't annoy me in the slightest. But it was an aircraft which, when it went into service and it was Was it 79 or 69? I think it was 79. No, 69. When it went into service, it was ahead of its game. And when it was retired in 2003, it was still ahead of its game. And now, in 2023, it's still ahead of its game. And it's the only time in aviation history when we've taken a step backwards and still nothing in the air which can match it. There's a new company in America called Boom, and Boom Supersonic, and they're making an aircraft called the Overture. You will see that its design is incredibly similar to Concorde, except it doesn't go as fast. It still goes supersonic, but not Concorde supersonic, and it doesn't carry the same amount of passengers. But that's the design of the new aircraft, and of course Concorde looked incredibly similar. That's not Concorde, that's Concorde, but you will see the difference in a minute. Anyway, Concorde, for anyone who doesn't know, and anyone who is new or is watching this and hasn't got much of an interest in aviation, Concorde was an airliner which could travel at twice the speed of sound. If you were to get on a plane now and fly from London to New York, it would take 7 hours-ish. Concorde could do it in 3. It went so fast, you could take off in the dark. So you could take off in the evening, watch the sun go down, get on the plane, take off, fly, and watch the sun come back up. It was literally a time travel machine. It went so fast, it went faster than the Earth rotates. And it could carry 100 passengers. And ticket prices were extortionately high. And the financial history of it has always been a bit ropey, but it did turn a profit, but only really in its latter years when they didn't use it just for British Airways and Air France. They opened it up and used it for charter flights, and it was a charter flight of which Air France flight 4590 from Charles de Gaulle, the 25th of July 2000, which ran over a piece of metal on its takeoff roll out of France, Paris airport. And about 3 or 4 minutes earlier, a Continental Airlines DC-10 had dropped a piece of metal on the runway, and Concorde ran over this piece of metal, and as the tire went over it, the metal sliced a chunk out of the wheel, and because it was going so fast, the chunk of rubber came off of the wheel with the velocity of a missile, and it shot up into the underside of the fuel tank and sent a shockwave inside the fuel tank, which went up and bounced out, and it punctured a hole in the fuel tank. So there was all of this fuel gushing out. And then as the rubber went out the back of the aircraft, it broke an electrical connection, they believe, which ignited the fuel. And there was this massive, huge blowtorch of fire coming out of the underside of the aircraft. I'll see if I can find a picture. Here we go. So this is an actual picture. This is not a recreation, and it's not one I particularly like zooming in on, but that was taken from an aircraft parked, holding at the side of the runway to let it take off, and someone saw it coming down the runway with flame, got the camera out and took this picture. The aircraft crashed 90 seconds later, and it killed everyone on board, and it crashed into a hotel on the edge of Gonesse and killed a lot of people in that as well. Tragic crash, but it's an incredibly famous picture, and you can see, and at the time, and this was one of the, I'll make a video on this at some point in more detail, but at the time, because when there's huge blowtorch, because all of that's fuel being ignited, so it was sucking through fuel, so the center of gravity was sliding along the aircraft and going completely out. So the aircraft was starting to rear up like that, and that's what ended up, one of the contributing factors to it crashing was that it just reared up and stalled and crashed. But the pilot mistakenly closed down these two engines, because it said that there was a fire. But as you can see, the fire wasn't coming from the engine. It was coming from the fuel tank to the side of it. So they shut down that engine, mistakenly thinking that the engine was on fire, when it was actually still producing thrust. And they needed all the power they could get. But yeah, that was what happened to Concorde. But that's what signalled really the downfall of Concorde. And it was after that that Air France was never really keen on getting it flying again, and they retired it in the early stages of 2003. And British Airways held on as long as they could, but retired it at the end of 2003. Yeah, it's incredibly sad, because it's such a beautiful aircraft, and I don't know why I get so emotional about it, but it's really, really sad. But anyway, Concorde was very special because people would line up at the end of the runway whenever it would take off, just to witness and feel the atmosphere of it, because it would take off and it would have 4 afterburners like a fighter jet. You don't see that on passenger aircraft, and this is, I think, the best video of it. This is departing out of Heathrow. And you'll see in a moment the afterburners will switch off, and that's their noise abatement procedure to reduce them. Because when the afterburners are on, it's loud, but you'll see they'll shut off. Come on. There we go. And then they climb out at a more sensible volume. But I thought I'd play this because you can see the kind of takeoff procedure they have. They line up on the runway, and they get takeoff permission.
Okay, we're cleared for takeoff. Everybody all set.
You've got this rack of 4 throttles, and I've sat in. I'm not sure if it was that actual aircraft. There's a video of the aircraft I sat in anyway, and you've got this rack of throttle control, and your hand sits quite comfortably on them. You jam it forward, and you can feel yourself being pushed back in your seat. It was that powerful.
Yeah, all set. Okay, 3, 2, 1, now.
The acceleration, apparently, when you were on it, there was nothing like it.
SP building.
And now they're doing their checks as they run down the runway, and in a moment you'll hear V1, and that's their point of no return. When they get to the V1 speed, they have to take off. If a wing falls off, they probably won't take off, but they have to try, because they don't have enough runway to stop. and rotation speed in Concorde is just after V1.
100 knots. Power set. V1.
Nose up.
Rotate.
And it's just this beautiful aircraft. I've always, when people have asked me about it, I've always said it's like a swan, because in particular the nose section, because it flies supersonic, it has to be shaped basically like a bullet. And when you've got this needle nose sticking out the front of it, because of its design and its delta wing, to slow it down, because it has no flaps, it has flaperons. I think that's the name of them. So to turn left and right, it also does the up and down, whereas on aircraft nowadays you have the elevators and the ailerons, but they're kind of built in together. So they couldn't have flaps as such, so they used the delta wing and this huge wing basically as a speed brake. So when they were landing, they pitched the nose up and like that, and that would slow the aircraft down for landing. Except when they've got a needle nose, they couldn't see the runway because it was sticking up like that, and they couldn't see it. So they had to do something, and it's famously known as the droop snoot. And it basically drops the nose out the pilot's line of vision so they could see the runway. Anyway.
Positive flow. Gear up.
So now they're climbing out, and they're climbing out at an incredibly fast speed, faster than all the other airliners. And in a moment, they'll have the noise abatement procedure. Which is
And next, the noise abatement procedure.
3, 2, 1, noise.
Once the aircraft is safely airborne, the engine power is reduced, the aircraft is levelled in order to maintain airspeed.
Okay, and then, after a while, when they're climbing a bit more, they raise the droop snoot. And you'll see it will come up and go over the windshield, and that's what turns it in the aircraft into supersonic flight.
Streamlining Concorde for high-speed flight.
I was going to say, to explain it better, here we go. So, right, this is the aircraft I have sat in at Brooklands Museum. And little piece of history. That man there is Mike Bannister, and he was chief Concorde pilot for the British Airways fleet. So this lever here is the visor, and at the moment it's in its upright position, and you'll see they'll put it down a notch, down a notch, down a notch, and the nose will drop. So they'll go down one, and the nose, this visor section will come down. And then, in a moment, they'll drop it a second stage, and this is the stage they have for takeoff. And as the aircraft is lying flat on the runway, they only need it out a little bit of a way, because then they're going to pitch up and they need to see the sky. But then to land, they're going to start by pitching up, so they need to get that even further out the runway, out the way. So they're going to drop it to the final stage, right down, and the nose will go whoop. And that's its fully down position. So that's the position. So the aircraft will be pitched up like that to land, and the nose would be down. So you can see the kind of difference between the like takeoff and landing and supersonic. It streamlined the aircraft. Anyway, we move on. I'm already, sucking up time here, but I'm going to actually move this. So this was the final takeoff from New York's John F. Kennedy Airport. It took off at 7 o'clock in the morning, I think. 7:20 in the morning, I do apologise. And this one is a video which chokes me up the most. Because it just looks so beautiful. It's absolutely stunning. Anyway.
There, she's rocking. There's the smoke.
So you see the amount of fuel which comes out, how much it's burning. It's sucked up fuel like there's no tomorrow, and oil, but that doesn't really matter. The point is, it's just the sound, and it's as it rotates. With the nose coming down, it almost looks sad. And of course, it was sad. It was the last time it would fly supersonic over the Atlantic. Of course, now we've got the famous Kennedy curl. I call it that. I don't know what they call it, but one of the conditions of them being allowed to fly it into New York's Kennedy was that they didn't create too much noise, and one of the ways they could do it was take off and then immediately bank it round to the left and climb out over Jamaica Bay, I think it is. So you'll see almost straight after takeoff, it's banking round to the left, gear comes up, and they keep the afterburners on to get it out, but then it goes straight out over the Atlantic. 1969, that was the last flight, first flight of it. The last two videos I will show you, this one's my favourite one, because it's just hilarious. And it's probably the nearest you can get to, or the nearest video I can find of a flying Concorde. Oshkosh is a air venture fly-in thing once a year in America, and they flew Concorde in one year, and people stood next to the runway to record it, and well, you'll see one of Concorde's little surprises. So this is it landing. So you can see the nose, look. It's amazing, that is. I mean, that's pretty close. Grease the landing. It's amazing. Now, we are on to the final video, which is, bear with me, it's Jeremy Clarkson. Now, he's a controversial man, but it's one of the very few things I agree with him about. I think that's the correct use of English, I don't really know. He's talking about Concorde, and he's currently sitting, I think that's a 747, that's an early 747, 200, 300. Anyway, he's talking about Concorde. Jeremy Clarkson and it's not going to get any better. Jeremy Clarkson and Piers Morgan were on the final flight of Concorde, and they quite famously had, it was full of celebrities and press, and they had a fight, and they were throwing food at each other in the cabin. Anyway, he makes a comment, and it's very true, and it sums it up perfectly. I think this is probably a good way to end.
We're currently flying along at 38,000 feet, which means we're a little closer to God, so I hope he hears this. Why? Why have you allowed us to go backwards? Why? Why haven't we got Concorde? If we'd have been in Concorde now, I'd have been at home playing with the kids instead of flying along over Nizhny Novgorod, wherever the hell that is.
Now Concorde is grounded, it becomes a museum piece like no other. Because unlike steam trains or Ford Mustangs, there's nothing that has superseded it. We're not looking at Concorde as an example of outdated technology. It is still at the cutting edge. Losing it has been one giant leap backwards for mankind.
I mean, it's just, look at that. It's a beautiful aircraft. It really is. Losing Concorde was a step backwards, and we still haven't come back to anything similar to it, and I don't think we ever will. Not something of that beauty and of that being that far ahead of its time. And I will go into a lot more detail another time about Concorde, but it's very sad. It's a real shame. And for all those who can't quite picture it or don't understand what kind of speed it travelled at, if you had a rifle and you shot a bullet out of a rifle, the speed at which that bullet comes out of the rifle, Concorde travelled faster than that. As I said earlier, it travelled faster than the Earth's rotation, so you could actually watch the sun come back up after watching it set again. You could actually buy back time, and if you're going the right direction, you could actually land in New York 3 hours or 2 hours before you took off. It's quite amazing. And they, in the later part of Concorde's life, they did charter flights, and they did little jaunts over the Bay of Biscay and up the North Sea to take people supersonic, and you could charter a Concorde for something like £200 per head, and people would do that. They'd get all their friends and say, let's go book a Concorde. They all pay, and the pilots would fly you down there and have a bit of supersonic flight. And you could have breakfast in London, get on Concorde, go down to Egypt, have a tour around the pyramids and the Sphinx, get back on Concorde, and be back in Heathrow in time for tea. You could have a day trip to Egypt. It's fantastic. Very early on in its career, there was a fighter pilot, and to put it into perspective, when Concorde took off, the fighter jets would have to move out of its way to let Concorde through, because Concorde could actually go faster than quite a few fighter jets of the time. And there's a very good video, and I don't know where it is. I might be able to find it for the next video, but there's a fighter pilot sitting in his fighter jet with all of this bodysuit and pressurized things and helmet and gas mask and oxygen, and then the camera zooms in on the window of Concorde because it's flying next to Concorde, and there's a passenger looking out the window sipping champagne. It was amazing. And I don't have one here, but it's almost the same. When Concorde was flying supersonic, twice the speed of sound, something like 9 miles a minute or something stupid like that. When it was flying that fast, you could get the tray table in front of you, get a coin, and you could balance it on the table, and it would sit there and not move. That's how steady and how smooth flying on Concorde at twice the speed of sound was. You could balance a 50, this is not 50p, but you could balance a 50p on its edge. It was quite fantastic. And some of the records they broke was something like they were carrying a golf team back from a tournament. And as they were flying supersonic, the captain decided he wanted to take a golf shot. So he got the cup and put it in front of the cockpit door. And then he went to the other end of the aircraft with his golf club and golf club, and ball, took a shot down the galley and down the aisle of Concorde, and caught the ball in the cup at the other end of the aircraft. And in the time it took for the ball to go from one end of the aircraft or the aisle to the other, they had travelled something like 6.5 miles. It's just, yeah, it was a fantastic aircraft. Oh, it was beautiful as well, and that was a bonus. And its design, it wasn't designed to look beautiful. It was designed to work, and it looking beautiful was an accident. And it really just... it's amazing. Anyway, I could ramble about it all day, and I could get very emotional about it, and that's probably for another episode where we will talk a bit about its unfortunate little accident and its decline and its retirement. But yeah, there we go. Told you I'd get emotional. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see more videos like this, other reacting videos, let me know and I will do some more. Or, of course, don't let me know and I will also do some more. Anyway, what time is it? 11:30. I should probably go to bed. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode. Ta-ra for now. I can't say that, actually. That's copying Michelle. What did I used to say? I used to say ta-ra. Ta-ra.